Greetings, everyone. Welcome to our exclusive Global Leading Voices webinar campaign. We are delighted to have you join us here today. Please be informed that if you have any questions during the presentation, you may type them into the question box in your control panel. The presenter will answer your questions at the end of the presentation accordingly. Now, without further ado, we will turn the time over to our presenter, who will begin shortly.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the latest PECB webinar on ISO 27001, data protection and risk management, and how they map against each other. I'm Tony English, and I'm here with my esteemed colleagues, George and Michael, and I'll let them introduce themselves. We're here for about an hour today, and we'll leave time at the end of this session for questions.
Good morning, I'm George Iusi, and with OmniStruct. I'm also a board member of an entity called Secure the Village on the West Coast in the US, where we are turning our community into cyber guardians.
Excellent. Michael.
Hi, everybody. My name is Mike Bastiani. I'm from the Netherlands. I'm currently on vacation, so you see the restaurant behind me for the good Wi-Fi. I hope it's okay during the meeting, but if it's noisy, I'll mute myself. I'm a freelance risk manager at the moment with my own company called RiskBase. I'm risk manager, project manager, and in general, and hope to talk to you today about risk management.
Perfect. Thanks, Mike. And of course, I'm Tony English, and I have a consulting company called Bot Security Solutions. And I'm currently working for a company out of Las Vegas called Big Cyber, which specializes in security and cybersecurity for a lot of industries, including lottery and gaming, amongst others. So the topic today is a three-part topic, and we're going to be covering a fair amount of ground in this time, but we've tried to knit it all together for you and included a lot of information that does gel together at the end of the presentation. So bear with us. But we do have a great little real life example to help guide us in this presentation today. So we'll be talking through that. Mike's going to run us through that scenario. We'll be looking at the interrelationship between privacy, data protection, and risk management, obviously, and the real world example for Mike. And then we'll look at data protection and how it would apply to that example that Mike provides us. And we'll look at privacy and how it applies, specifically 27701, which some of you may be familiar with already. And then we'll look at the relationship between those three areas generally as well: privacy, data protection, and risk management. So I have a few definitions for you first, just to set our groundwork for us for the discussion today. I'll provide a brief definition on ISO 27701, and we'll look at it some more near the midpoint or near the end of the presentation. So this is an ISO standard that's an extension to the 27001 standard, which is probably a lot.
Folks, I think we may have lost Tony's audio. Michael, would you concur?
Yeah, I don't hear Tony as well.
That's all right.
I'm happy it's not me, though.
So I'll continue. So definitions here are a set of requirements and guidelines dedicated to privacy information management. And of course, we have mapping to the 29100, 27018, 29151, and then we have the EU GDPR. And it is focused on the protection of personally identifiable information. And as you traverse the globe, you'll find that there are different interpretations of both data protection as well as PII and how it is governed. So I am not certain how to move the slide forward, to be honest with you. So
me neither. I thought Tony did that.
I think Tony was driving. So, but let's see if I can bring up he'll probably be rejoining in a second. So until he gets back to us, we can talk a little bit about Michael and your use case, or I should say incident scenario, as well as the reality that, oh, and here comes Tony back, that a lot of us look at hackers as bad guys with these hoodies and, kind of going after data. You have to realize that hackers are also arsonists. They set these little backdrafts and fires. And so when we look at these kinds of frameworks that, help us secure cyber, there's always some degree of cross mapping. And so when we talk about PII, those scenarios apply differently depending upon where you're at or what your jurisdictions are, so to speak, and where you're doing business. So with Tony back online, I think he's going to try to get the slides up and running again, and we'll move on to the next slide.
Yeah, we had a major interruption, I guess, of our service here for GoToWebinar. Okay. So yeah, so 27701, as you probably heard, focuses on PII and not data protection generally, but specifically on PII. So George, want to walk us through data protection?
Data protection is generally defined as protection of important data. And important data, as Tony had mentioned, that's depending upon where you're at and how you interpret it, or what legal team is supporting you, they may give you different responses as to what is important data. But generically speaking, in the sense of the ISO body of work, it doesn't necessarily mean PII without 27701. And important data, obviously, it's best to just give you those attributes as trade secrets, confidential information, information privacy in general. It could also be related to configuration management database data that keeps the network up and running, and the ability to, kind of recon the network and perform a denial of service attack. That could be important data, understanding how the network runs and how to bring it down.
Perfect. And Mike, want to give us a brief definition of risk management?
Yeah, sure. I think the one from ISO is the one you want to hear right now. So risk management is actually the identification of threats, vulnerabilities, and impacts to calculate risk and apply appropriate mitigations or determine the risk action plan. That's how it's formally said. For me, it's actually just looking at what can go wrong. Always you look at possibilities, but I tend to focus on what can go wrong. That's my nature, and that's what I find most useful. So the goal of risk management is to reduce risk where you can. Sometimes you need to accept the risk. You get attacked automatically all the time on the web. That's a given. How you work on that, that's your choice. So I think that's what I want to say for now about the definition of risk. I don't see the slides moving towards the pages we had. Is that correct?
Do you see the risk management slide now?
I see the overall introduction slide. For you as well, George?
See the risk management slide?
Okay, that's not good. Makes it very hard for me to see what I'm talking about.
Yeah, we have a few issues with GoToWebinar today, as we heard when the webinar started. So you may see some pauses and hiccups. We apologize for those, and we'll recover as quickly as we can. We are now on slide 8, Mike, where we're going to talk about risk management and run through your real life example.
Yeah, that's perfect. Slide 8. So I want to talk to you today about risk management and about a real-life ransomware attack that I've experienced at a Dutch railway operator that I've worked for in the past. That really happened, and the reason I think that's interesting for everybody is because it can happen to everybody. It happened under perfect ransomware attack situation, like Tony and I discussed earlier. This is the example of how you can get attacked, and I hope you find it interesting. And I want to show you what happened a little bit with the timeline and how actually combining forces between risk management department and the chief information security office, the CISO office, resulted into good lessons learned that we would not have obtained otherwise. So if we can go to the timeline of the ransomware attack. Then I can walk you through it a little bit. So what happened on March 16th of a given day is a project team ordered the operational coordinator for test runs on a train to connect a hardware device to the internet to update for the test night later that week. He did as was said, and the device was connected. What happened a few days later is the internet scans automatically for vulnerable places, which was this. Unfortunately, because there was very simple password set up for a remote desktop access. And yeah, that's asking for trouble. That's like leaving a jewelry case in front of the window and leaving the window open, actually. But my colleagues know a lot more about ransomware, and as a risk manager, I just came here and learned all about this new stuff, and it was really cool. And try to show this timeline for you. Tony, are you following the timeline as I speak a little bit?
I am, yes.
I thought
It's through in the
okay,
day.
perfect.
We're at 20th March when something very bad happened.
Yeah. So the people for the test night came in the train and tried to plug in a Surface laptop to connect to the device and see what it says. Hey, a message: all your files have been encrypted. Too bad. So that's a bit cutting it short. I'm sorry, but I'm just walking you through it because otherwise you can walk through this. But he calls the project management team immediately, who's on standby. The program manager. He receives the messages, what's going on, and orders the operational coordinator to disconnect the hardware completely and turn the train off, shut down. It's actually a lesson learned as well, because later I've learned that you should not shut down a device completely, but disconnect it primarily so you can obtain the log files later on. But that was a lesson learned, of course. Operational coordinator, of course, does as instructed, and everything is in shutdown mode. I see I have not translated the late hours on the right, the late uurtjes. Program manager does futile attempts to reach senior management and the cyber emergency response team. So next slide, please. This is a lot of information, but we'll go through it step by step. The project team and the next day continues to try to alert the CERT, the Cyber Emergency Response Team, and the Chief Information Security Officer and senior management. What happened is people were unavailable on Sunday, you can imagine, but the processes for reaching each other in case of emergency for operational technology had not really been formalized as it is for IT in office environments, which is also more during work hours most of the time. But operational technology, OT, train technology, and whether you have a train or a nuclear power plant or energy plant or whatever, that technology is not often as developed in how do we react in case of an emergency, and this was actually an emergency. So there was a big lesson learned over there. But by luck, the security officer in the technology department notices the message and start working and calls his colleagues at the CERT directly, and everything starts rolling. Of course, the CERT pushes back, says, you should have mentioned this earlier to us, but of course, because you weren't available, because it wasn't discussed earlier. And betrokken management, the lower block, is actually involves senior management, which also had not translated, I see. The manager of train digitization reads the messages, involves the director of technology and IT, and action and communications plan are established. So next day, first day of the working week, Monday, a lot of discussions, a lot of people talking together. How we're going to do this? Is this contained elsewhere in the system? Can we research that? A lot of emphasis is on is the train and the operational technology still integrity in the CIA, was that? So in English, is it still working like it should be, and has it not been affected? And luckily, the train can be let free, by lack of a better English word.
And Mike,
Yeah, sorry.
slides as well. You have some great coloring in the points on your slides where you have possible learning points, an event versus an undesired event. But the possible learning points are ones you identified after the fact, or maybe there's something that could be done to improve this issue, right?
Yeah, indeed. That's the yellow dots, indeed. And what you saw happening on Monday morning was senior management started drawing the incident towards a certain direction that was not helping to find the root cause of the incident. What really happened, organizational-wise, process-wise. Look, technically, it's really simple. Like I said, eking ransomware software, simple password, etc., etc. But how did it came to be like that? And you have to dive deeper, and management need to allow you to do that. That was really cool to experience, actually, in real life. So we pushed back. This chief information security officer and us at risk management started diving into this. You can click further, Tony. Yeah, the security officer already shows some signals that management is pushing matters into the wrong direction, and it makes it harder for us to do our work. Like I said, the train is already free, takes additional measures with security officer, and let's at least prevent that the same stuff can happen again for now, and then try to start learning organizational wise what happened and why. And yeah, the major focus shifted towards external service laptops for suppliers, which is a good thing that it actually was focused on, but was not the root cause of the incident. A forensic investigation was ordered by CERT, and that was really slow as well. That also did not happen. Next slide, please.
So you should see your bow tie analysis now with causes, events, the main event, and the impact.
I do not. I'll grab it on my PowerPoint over here. No problem. So what we did, that's really a risk management thing to identify bow tie with central undesired event on the left-hand side or right for you. I don't know what you're looking at. If it's mirrored or not. Our causes, and on the other side are impact. And in between you have events and barriers, controls, how you want to name them. You can all look at this later on, but it's really apparent that one of the major causes was scarce cybersecurity expertise. We did not have enough time to assess at that time that we needed to connect the device to the internet. Like, hey, wait, is this smart? Should we really do that? Also, COVID was a major cause for the incident, because the external supplier wanted to watch with the tests on Saturday night from distance, so they had to set it up like it had been. There was time pressure on the project, etc., etc. And there are different controls like firewall that did not help to prevent the ransomware infection. And there were learning points as discussed earlier. We did not install proper management of change. That was a big one, because that's something you see all around major companies. That when you change the system, it's not a biggie, it's not bad, but do it consciously and look at the risks when you do. Otherwise, you get screwed over. That's what.
Yeah.
And on the right-hand side, you see impacts of the incident. Delay for the program. We had to do a lot of research and investigate. It cost a lot of time to do so. Also, the external review was costly. This was a good event to happen because this was automated ransomware attack, right? If a hacker sees this and looks at what he has in his net, they might consider hacking further, and then you get real interesting stuff. And then you see, we're not really comfortable with this. How far can the hacker actually get? We don't know. We should investigate. So the kill chain, as you call it, for ransomware had to be assessed later on. But luckily, all kinds of barriers and controls are in place to prevent an actual accident later on.
Perfect.
So I think I'm going to go to my conclusions a little bit, Tony.
Great. No, that's perfect. I just got kicked off again. I just rejoined, so I've lost my screen sharing again.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. Good, you're back. I think we're going to go to conclusions right now.
Okay, perfect. I'll just share screen too.
I'm just going to do that while you bring up the screen a little bit. So this was the first business control incident we've had when the CISO office and risk department were working together so closely. And it was a big lesson to be learned. What I showed briefly right now was stuff we should have done technically otherwise, stuff we should have done organizationally otherwise. After the fact, we should do stuff differently to react properly. But also, yeah, get your risk management and management of change in order. When you change systems like this, whether it's a train or a power plant or something else, you know, everything is becoming connected to the internet, but that has some risks with it, and be mature about that. So we went really deep with this investigation because it was the first time, and we were lucky that this happened now and not 5 years later when the technology was proven and installed, etc., etc. And having the information security expertise in the second line defense for risk was actually really good. That helped me to go deeper, and I could help the ISO with going further with going organizational wide to install mitigating measures to get more awareness also. That's what this also is for. It does cost a lot of time to get where we got, so we need to reserve more time for that in the future. And you should too, because it's not a question when you're gonna get attacked like this. It happens instantly, and when you have one bad moment, you're screwed. So this is what I want to show you for today a little bit. Hope you liked it. See questions later.
Great. And I could tie this into a major event we just had in Canada, which made international news with our Rogers cellular network outage. Rogers is a major ISP here in Canada, and it took millions of people offline. It was purely caused by a lack of change management process. So a good lesson learned there too. It carries over from this one. So we'll talk briefly about data protection now, and George, will let you try to tie this all together in with Mike's great example.
Absolutely. So first and foremost, you know, we're going to kind of take a look at generally what some of the objectives are in ransomware. In this particular case, deniability seems to have been, and Michael, you know, please clarify if I'm incorrect on that. But that was essentially the objective of that incident, not necessarily to abscond with data, but to impact availability. Is that accurate?
I would say the primary goal is to obtain ransom as money, but it is done by denying availability. Yes, absolutely.
But the impact of the reason you would pay the ransom, you know, the outcome is, uh-oh, I can't run my train. That was so the availability of services, or rather than, you know, stealing personally identifiable information, you know, per se. So it's important we understand that, you know, ransomware outcomes are what tend to matter. And in the traditional CIA triad, confidentiality, integrity, availability. Availability is still a factor, and I think Rogers learned that through change management as well. Even though there was no ransomware incident, is that correct, Tony? As far as
That's
you know,
correct, George. Yeah, it was purely poor change management internally.
right. I once had another backbone engineer, and my career got started as a design backbone engineer. I was doing designs for some of the largest backbones from really dating myself now, Alta Vista and Yahoo, and when those organizations first started in the 90s. And availability was everything. And commonly I would hear, how can I secure what's not available? And so it's interesting how that's come full circle in the sense that, malicious threat actors are generally thinking, how do I make sure it's not available so I can extort ransomware, extort dollars via ransomware? The other is, of course, what I call a timely confusion situation, where I'm going to launch a ransomware attack on Christmas Day or Boxing Day or whatever holiday, the target may favor, when we know that there are not as many people working. So it kind of depends on what the attacker is trying to achieve. But of course, ultimately, it's about absconding and extorting, abscond with the data and extort. And that doesn't always happen in a ransomware incident. We've seen ransomware incidents at hospitals where they've just bring down the hospital in all. Now nurses can't provide medications to patients because it's all electronic. So be aware of the outcomes of ransomware, and when you are protecting data, you have to look at it from what we call a pre-mortem perspective, which you try to understand what the worst case scenario is, and that's something that a risk manager would do, is think about the worst. I think is what you said, Michael. So go ahead and move on to the next slide, please. So important information. I think the thing that we have to understand is that when we talk about data protection, it's the process of protecting the privacy, integrity, and availability of what essentially is that data. So you want the data to be available internally to those that need to know. And in situations where the data might be sensitive, you will definitely be in a situation where you may be creating enclaves, either from a network perspective or a design perspective in your application or systems, and with different administrative and user access levels. So, but ultimately, the data protection of important information is a process, not a moment in time. Next slide, please. Now, when we talk about strategic data protection, it's about preventing the theft of the information, or what we call disclosure. So disclosure may not be theft. That's why I have that in parentheses. It may be an accidental disclosure, like a production environment that somebody actually left open accidentally, to the World Wide Web, or to a specific protocol. And I think perhaps in some incidents that are more popular, you may have heard of these kinds of situations where, like a building management system incident. And so how do you make sure, or rather a building management incident where somebody left something open and the malicious attacker just kind of found the hole, right? And accidentally you've disclosed a bunch of information about that building management system, or in the case where there's an AWS instance where you actually open up the instance to the web with all that data. Oops. Right. So it may not actually get compromised, it may get disclosed, but now you have a disclosure issue and there's actions you have to take to let people know that that's happened. And so it becomes very strategic in nature of, if you understand that was it stolen or not? Was it accidentally disclosed and then taken? The other item, of course, is corruption. So corruption of the data. So if you can't get to the data, obviously a ransomware incident maps to that. The data is now corrupt. And in some cases, many would argue that even if I pay the ransom, is that even going to satisfy the situation, right? It's kind of like somebody, stealing your car and calling you up and saying, hey, I can get you your car back. Just pay this, and you pay it, and then you get the car back, but it's in pieces and you have to reassemble it. So
Yeah, the worst
and then,
maybe they've made a clone of your car and they're selling it on the dark web, as
that's right.
happens with data extraction.
They've replaced it with other parts, right? You just don't know, right, who you're dealing with. And ultimately, you want to prevent that kind of corruption, and it starts with the theft of the data in many cases, and then loss. The loss issue is, how you strategically prevent loss of that, not just the data, but also the integrity of the organization, and that you can reflect even, and I think we can all probably agree to some degree, that compromise is a matter of when, not if.
Mhm.
So you sometimes will be in a situation where you have a theft incident or a corruption incident and you've experienced loss and people want to know what happened. So if you can demonstrate that you were doing the right thing, especially when nobody was watching, you're probably in a much better situation than if you were negligent in the handling strategically of the data that you're trying to protect. So that's why things like GRCs, or governance and regulatory compliance platforms, are suddenly all over the place, because now we have essentially, at least where I'm from in the state of California, and for those of you that aren't familiar with their comprehensive data privacy laws here, or the CCPA, CPRA, different angle, obviously. Just think of it as a bunch of bears running around in a campground, regulators trying to kind of chase down the organizations that don't have minimum viable privacy protection. So, and that's where jurisdiction comes into play. So even in the ISO arena, you could, by demonstrating you're doing that, you are in a much better position than those that are not. Next slide, please. Your mindset. Now, this is extremely important. We talk often about what we need to do in the trenches, right? But mindset is important. The entire organization should have the mindset to keep sensitive data sacred. Without the right behavior and without the right approach mentally and culturally, you're going to have more issues. So it becomes a critical point, especially if you are in a IT or security function, to point out bad behavior that is outside of your authority, which most of it is if it's not in your department. And if you can help the leadership understand that a sensitive data, or keeping sensitive data sacred as a mindset, can come from the top down, it's going to make a difference. Next slide, please, talks about the footprint. And this is where a comprehensive data protection strategy comes in. So you can't just, have the right mindset. You actually have to do the work. You have to do the footprint work. And that's really what we're talking about here with, this ISO body of work, is making sure that your footprint is in place. Now, do you need to get a perfect A on day one? No. You need to start working towards that, essentially the prescriptive requirements, whether you set them reasonably internally or you're following a framework specifically and prescriptively, or a law, regulatory or statutory situation. That's part of your data protection strategy. And this is where risk management also comes in. They're there to help you crunch those numbers and make sure that from a risk management, we call it cyber risk management perspective, that's been addressed. Next slide, please. So what should you consider here? This is also beyond the ISO body of work here. There has to be an understanding of your risks. And ultimately, if you know where those risks are, then everyone should know their responsibilities. And when something goes amiss, like this incident that Michael described, transparency and visibility are important, and that's where the learning and the lessons come into play. So when you're looking at data protection and the regulations that you face, you must be transparent and be willing to share those experiences so others can learn from them. Next slide, please. So what should you be doing right now? the answer is actually pretty simple from a high level perspective. What do you tell the board? What do you tell the C-suite? If you walk in and say ISO 27701, is that you know what it's going to sound like to them? I have a flux capacitor that goes 10, 155 kilowatts or megawatts. If you're a Back to the Future fan, you know what I'm talking about, right? Okay, right. Make it simple for me. Okay, this is how you manage risk, boss, leader. What we really need is better governance, right? We've been fighting this ground war called cybersecurity for years. We have these wonderful frameworks that are out there that help us fight that war. But these frameworks are adding what essentially is a cyber risk air war component that's been added and layered over top of the ground war. And it's not about the geeks in the trenches, turning the wrenches. It's more so about behavior and leadership. And that's what a properly managed, governed cyber risk program looks like, or we call GRC and governance and regulatory compliance. That's why those platforms exist. For those of you that are familiar with the famous RSA conference that happens every year, there's always buzzwords at this conference. And this year there were two buzzwords: zero trust in the ground war in the trenches. And the other was governance, compliance, governance, compliance. Everywhere you went, every booth had zero trust and had the ground war and the air war every year. So if you think of it that way and you can explain it to leadership that way, they'll understand that, hey, listen, we have to govern this better. We need a security program. We need a privacy program. We already have a risk management team who are building a risk management program. And that interdepartmental approach has to work. And you have to demonstrate it every day. So with that, I think that's my last slide. I'll turn it over to Tony.
Well, George, I can't agree more. And I'll tell you, I've seen a lot of organizations which had the spirit of wanting security at that technical level and knowing they needed it, but then the commitment from the organization sometimes just wasn't there. So they built these lovely artifices and these structures to put security in place, but because there was no commitment from that management initiative and pushing it forward, they would die on the vine.
Right. Well, that's what legislation, that's what our lawmakers are trying to do everywhere globally, right? Often, and unfortunately, executives and leaders and even business owners see cybersecurity as just a ground war. Stop the hacker, stop the hacker, stop the hacker. There's going to be crime, I'm sorry. So what are you going to do as a leader to step in and lead this? And often what you get is leadership who goes, it's a blinking light. Send it over the fence to the technical people. You can't do that anymore. That's what lawmakers are trying to change. So prescriptively now we have these frameworks that you can point to and say, I'm following this, instead of just, I'm using best practices, which we used to say a lot in security, right? Oh, best practices, what does that mean to you? Well, I'm kind of like the police officer of this organization because I'm doing security. And so my best practice is I'm going to shoot slingshots at hackers when they come in. But then the new guy comes in, he's like, I'm throwing grenades. And then another guy is, launching nuclear warheads and blowing everything up, right, as a tactic to stop a hacker. And it can get very dangerous if everyone isn't on the same page. And so that's what these we call them the encyclopedia of cyber risk and cybersecurity that are within these frameworks. And in the ISO world, that's critical. We've lost Tony again, so hopefully he'll pop back in. But and the critical point that we like to make often in these situations is that your cyber risk now has to be properly managed, and it has to be transparent in case a regulator or in case of an arrears of an incident, when you have to do the cleanup. It's not just about containing and learning lessons. It's about, here come the regulators. They want to know what happened, and they want you to demonstrate what you're doing. So having a proper data map, having an updated network map, because when that digital forensics incident response expert walks in the door, that's what they're going to ask for. And if you don't have them, they're going to be like, well, I'll do my best, but I don't know where your data is, and I don't know where your I don't know what your network looks like. We don't have an updated map for me to understand what happened. So do that ahead of time and understand where that data is. And that's going to be, that's essentially the easy button of what my organization does, OmniStruct. So we're the helper that does those things. And you'd be surprised how much convincing leadership needs you know, if you're just fighting a ground war. But if you explain that there's an air war, they get right on board because they understand that that's them and they need to lead it. So Tony's back, slides are back. I'm going to hand it over to Tony. I tried to fill it a little bit there for you.
I'm just in need of a total reboot, I think, of my system. I apologize. Yeah, so 27701, we talked about this briefly at the start of the presentation, but it's really a shim put on top of 27001 to add privacy protection, protection of PII to 27001. I just put up a screenshot here of an example of this. This control might look familiar. It's from Annex A in 27001, but it's been updated with this little bit at the bottom, additional implementation guidance for protecting test data. This was added for the 27701 standard on top of the 27001 control. So it doesn't wholesale replace portions of 27001, but it does add on to controls in that 27001 standard. The reason for doing it this way is to try to integrate privacy into your information security management system. That's its purpose. So they become linked together and you end up with a comprehensive system that can cover security and privacy. So for the scenario, we were talking about, Mike had mentioned a few times that there was some issues with the processes, procedures that were in place, with incident response, with change management. And through a risk analysis process of the event, you can actually see this stuff called out very quickly when Mike ran through it. So the goal with 27701 is to add a PIMS, a privacy information management system, on top of your information security management system, your ISMS, and make them work together as a unified unit, rather than having a CISO separate from a privacy officer. They work together, and you understand that security also includes the need to protect data and to protect private data as well, PII. So in this example, Mike had mentioned that the CISO office and risk management team were recently combined. So making sure that all of your management systems, your information security management system, your privacy information management system, were updated to reflect this change would be really important, so that you make sure the processes are there to make any response to an event like Mike outlined smoother and rehearsed and better known to all the participants.
I think that would be of great help for us if we had that in the Tony, to be honest. So great example.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you. So linking these three together now, ISO 27001 data protection and risk management. George, as you pointed out just really clearly in your slides, the need to have an integrated program and have that program implemented at all levels is really important. And we also talked about how data protection maybe wasn't the be all and end all. You also have to have risk management in there as well, as Mike pointed out. And you have to make sure that risk management, data protection, and privacy management are all part of your information security management program. And even though 27701 focuses on PII, you shouldn't take that as the only way to apply it. I would not be hesitant to even think about 27701 as being applicable to protecting other types of data other than PII. And then 27701 describes a PIMS based on the ISMS, so a privacy information management system based on the information security management system. And this ensures a relationship between information security, data protection, risk management, all included in there, and privacy management. Any final thoughts on these topics from you, Mike, first?
Yeah, I think what triggered me was that you can use this as well for other valuable information or data other than privacy or PII. What kind of information do you think of when you say that?
So I think of the things we saw George mention, like any kind of confidential data, corporate data, or maybe proprietary information related to coding or source code or things like that you want to protect. Those aren't PII, but they are critical pieces of data you want to protect. In the case of your example, I think about accessing those systems that might interrupt the flow of trains. Those systems should be considered as crown jewels, because that's the key purpose of a rail system, is to move trains on rails. So that's where I'd look to attack first, to interrupt rail service.
Indeed, luckily those systems weren't affected, but an experimental kit that was developed to automatically drive trains.
Oh,
So
good.
there was a lot of intellectual property in there, actually. That was valuable. So I completely concur.
George, any of your final thoughts from you?
I think the key word here is a holistic approach. The entire organization. This is no longer a toss it over the fence to the techs and pray situation. This is an all hands problem, which is why risk management has become such a critical part of the equation. Risk managers want to be involved, evidenced by what essentially is, litigation. That's obvious, and at least in CCPA, CPRA, there's plenty of things going on here in California, regardless of your opinion or one's opinion of whether you think the legislation is flawed or what have you. And so attorneys get involved, right? That's a risk management problem. Cyber insurance, that's a risk management problem, right? And so, and I think there was an article recently, gosh, I apologize, I don't remember which entity, but I thought it was Gartner that sent out an analysis that the information security problem is very quickly going to be evolving into a risk management control objective rather than within an information security department itself. I mean, the ground war that information security analysts are fighting will continue to matter for a very long time. But we also have to recognize that in most organizations, or what we refer to as small businesses, at least here in the US, there's 3-point-some odd million of them.
Mm.
And attacking a comprehensive framework may not be a reality, not just here in the U.S., but in global data privacy protection. And there's legislation everywhere and laws everywhere now. And so when you look at doing something reasonable, so everybody's on the same page, ISO 27701 that's what they've done with this, and the PIMS is the prescription that has to be fought in the ground war, but requires consideration in the air war as well. And so that becomes a leadership accountability function. And so when we talk about these relationships between security and privacy and risk management, things are changing and will continue to change. And we've seen it before in history as well, which is one of the kind of the things that you look to. And maybe we'll have a future webinar on that topic, the evolution of the cybersecurity problem, and how it compares to other things that have happened in history. So,
right, that'd be a good topic. Very interesting.
It's really about staying in front of the other guy when you're both trying to away from a bear, right? And this is the way to stay ahead of the other guys.
Yeah, hopefully.
And I see you've got our email addresses as well as our LinkedIn. Anyone that's joined the webinar, they're more than welcome to connect with us directly. Some of us have restrictions on our LinkedIn profiles. I do, so you can't connect with me on LinkedIn without knowing my email address. So please note that. Even LinkedIn has ways to, block people from connecting with you. So as far as the closing, Tony, did you have anything else you wanted to add, or?
No, I don't think so. I think we want to turn it over now for any questions.
Thank you very much, Tony, George, and Michael for delivering this very informative webinar. Just to remind our audience that PCB offers training and certification courses, which will show your dedication in implementing and managing privacy and risk-related frameworks, amongst others. And most importantly, you will get recognized worldwide. Now, without further ado, we'll go ahead and take some time to answer some of the questions from the attendees. So the first question is how to deal with an organization that do not have a risk management unit department and no risk management in place.
That's a great question. I can take that unless Michael, you wanted to. So.
No, I think it's a good question because it touches on what you said earlier for small and medium enterprises that generally don't have a risk management manager involved. So please have at it.
Yeah, so that's actually that is the reason my organization was created, is because what we've learned is that, you know, let's refer to it as the other 98% of businesses that are out there, they don't have risk management departments. They just don't. And so now suddenly you're thrust into what essentially are cascading regulatory and statutory requirements. And oh, I have to do this now, but you have no risk management department. And so the challenge is that many of these smaller organizations, and when I say small, I want to be very clear that this could be a $250 million organization. And this could be a $1 billion organization. And of course, I'm speaking in US dollars. But ultimately, you have to understand that there's problems there too. They may not have, maybe they have a risk management leader, maybe one risk manager working for that leader, and that's it. And they're worried about, you know, hazardous material incidents, depending if they're in manufacturing and dealing with, you know, chemicals that, you know, could be a hazmat situation or hazardous material situation. And all of a sudden, we thrust cyber in their lap, and they're like, I don't know what. And so they're going to reach out to the geeks with the hats and try to solve it, which is a good first step, is at least they're aware. But if you have no risk management, generally you're probably working with some kind of a service provider to solve a lot of your problems. And call them IT managed service providers or resellers, solution providers, value-added distributors. They have all kinds of names, right? They're going to fight the ground war because that's what they do. They're first responders of everything tech, which is wonderful in the ground war. But in the air war, this is where a helper is necessary. And I'd mentioned before, you need some kind of a security program first before you can have a privacy program, because if you can't keep it secure to keep it available, then how are you going to protect the privacy? So you'll start with a privacy program. You can rotate that around whatever you like. I'm sorry, a security program, and you'll rotate that around whatever framework that you feel is appropriate, right? And you need a helper for that. So find a helper that understands what it is that you need, and get that rolling. So that helper will get that ball rolling. They should be able to do it at a very reasonable price and have it scaled well, because they can follow a framework that's repeatable. So that drives costs down. Then you can address the privacy program component, either at the tail end of that security program. You can try to do them together, but you can only put so much pressure on the departments in your organization, and you're throwing all these technical terms. Use MFA and whatever it is from a security perspective. If you're not mature there, and all of a sudden you're ramming privacy down your throat, they're going to choke on it. So it makes sense to start first. If you haven't done any real security program, start with that. And generally here, when we look at the risk management problem for small businesses, we have to work with that service provider that you're working with, because they're the ones that are going to enforce the controls. And if you have an internal IT team, you're probably still working with outside helpers in other areas. And so it can get very confusing, which is why you really need somebody who understands cyber risk management, privacy management, but also security management. Another great resource, at least here in the US, we have an entity I'm on the board for. It's called securethevillage.org. And it's the IT service providers and the resellers and all those companies, if they need help so they can do a better job for their customers, go there. There's free resources there. And we're trying to bring to businesses, as part of that model, help for free. right? And so everybody loves free, right? So by having that repository of services, and it's as you know, look for the not-for-profits that are out there like that in your area, because they want to help too, because this is not a isolated problem. Everyone has this problem.
Yeah, and I'd probably also recommend just add on to George, because I like to add on to stuff George says and Mike says. I would also add on to join any professional organizations you can that are nearby, and milk those attendees at those organizations for extra information.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'd like to add, if I may, that wherever I go, if people say I don't have a risk manager, usually they do a lot of risk management. It's also very fun to identify. Of course, you have all kinds of frameworks, and you need guys like us maybe to help you with a little bit there. But it's more of a mindset that you need to get into with your management, which also Tony said in the beginning very well, and George as well. To take the next step, then you get the ball rolling. That's very important, just to start.
Thank you very much. So the next question is, could you please clarify what is the difference between an incident and a privacy breach?
I'll
Good
give you a
question.
little information on that, I guess. An incident could be a security incident, or it may not yet be a security incident, it may be a technical IT incident, which could develop into a security incident. Whereas a privacy breach specifically involves PII. So it's information that you should be protecting. It may not belong to you. It may belong to your clients. It may belong to employees, maybe like HR records, for example. Breach of that information is treated differently because it's governed by laws often in your own jurisdiction, or international laws may apply to you because of the data being from another country. I know in Canada, for example, we have lots of organizations, in the United States as well, that are subject to GDPR because they store data from people who are members of the European Union, citizens of the European Union. So a data breach is quite a bit different, a privacy breach, and that is handled in a different way. And often there's lawyers involved. There's advice, at least legal advice, provided on whether or not you should disclose, or what you should disclose and when and to who. There's rules around how you do all of that stuff and how you manage it. And often those are driven by the legislation, whereas a security is completely internal.
Yeah, and although I'm not a privacy attorney, we work with many of them. That's part of what we have to deliver sometimes, are consultative engagements in privacy. What they'll often say is that you have an incident, right? Everything's an incident when it starts. Does it cross the threshold into a privacy-related incident? And that's generally, remember, if they're in court in front of a judge, right? It's got to be super simple, and so that's generally what an attorney would tell you. Because once a malicious threat actor crashes into your business and causes an incident, and they abscond with the data, now it's a privacy relevant incident. And there is what essentially, at least here we have NIST, or it's a kind of a scientific governing body here that launched what essentially is the NIST cybersecurity framework for security programs. And now there's what essentially is the NIST privacy framework. It's actually been around for a while. And they do those mappings between those two functions. That works fairly well here in the US because, you know, it's easy for, so litigators tell me that they can walk into the courtroom and say, hey, we followed NIST. Oh, if you don't like it, change the law, right? And we'll follow that, but we're following NIST. And so it becomes you're pointing to what is prescribed as a guideline in the US. And this is something I think attorneys do well for a living, is, transferring risk for you. So when you don't have a risk management manager, generally the place to find that in very small organizations, you go to the CEO and they have some assistant, and find the person who's writing cyber insurance, who's dealing with cyber insurances. They're probably doing risk management for the organization, or insurances in general. That's where you start. But always look to an outside helper and make sure that when it comes to a privacy, the difference between privacy and just an incident, that you have a checklist for that. And NIST does have one. It's called, I think it's the 800-60 or 800-61. It's very early in the morning here, so and
you're on track, George.
Just look up NIST computer incident handling, and they actually have a template, a checklist on how you handle an incident, and then you have a function in there that was it privacy related or not, if it's privacy relevant. And then all of a sudden you're in the NIST PF, the NIST privacy framework. So there's guidelines out there, but in the ISO world, it's, that's what PIMS is about. It's addressing that function in that ground war and then translating that into an air war function too. And you just need to have a helper for that. So that's a good starting point.
Thank you very much. And the last question for today says, we talked about the ransomware. In which case it is recommended to pay the ransom?
Loaded question.
I missed that. You cut out a little bit on the audio. We talked about what?
Ransomware.
The question was, ransomware, when do you pay and when do you not? Yeah, that's a difficult one. It's a cat and mouse game, really, but I think you guys know a lot about that.
Yeah, it's a difficult question in a couple of ways, because it depends on where you are in the world. Because I know in the United States, for example, there's a real push, and George, you can speak to this, a real push to make the payment of those ransoms not legal for certain entities within the States, certain types of bodies. And in Canada, I know for a fact, our law enforcement always first says never pay the ransom, because you're just encouraging it. But that's easy to say when it isn't your data and you don't have any backups. So it's a very tricky thing to respond to, I guess. The rule of thumb from all investigative bodies, and I spoke on a panel with a former FBI director a few weeks back, and he said, we always said never pay it, because that was the rule. And then we leave the room and let them talk to their lawyers and their consultant.
Right. And there are organizations where that's all they do. They negotiate with ransomware threat actors, and some of them do it pro bono for like not-for-profits. I've seen that happen as well. But ultimately, they help you decide whether or not it makes sense to pay it.
Now, I've worked on one ransomware event where they had to pay it because the ransomware actors had the data and there were no valid backups of it. And it was the only data that ran this business. So they were stuck, and they weren't even a large business. They were a medium-sized business. And then there's where it wasn't paid, and the data ended up published on the dark web. And the data often, in that case, was valuable enough it hurt the organization. And in the specific case, it did cause reputational damage. It was recovered from, but it was damaging.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you once again, Tony, George, and Michael for presenting today. And thank you everyone for attending today's webinar. Please be informed that this session is recorded and will be posted on our PCB website and YouTube channel, along with the slides of the presentation. Looking forward to have you in our upcoming webinars, and have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for.
Bye-bye.